Who's the most underappreciated player at your team? Well, today I'm joined by John Mackenzie and JJ Bull to find out the answer. Okay, so let me fill you in on the background here, gang. We asked the newsroom at The Athletic, the writers and the editors, to pick the most underappreciated players from each team. So we've got a bit of a voting system in place. Today I have a short list for each team to bring to you, and both of you, John and JJ, are going to pick who you think is the most underappreciated from that list. Now, quick caveat here. Obviously, we can't spend forever talking about each team in the Premier League, so if we skate over your team a little bit, it's because we hate you personally. Oh, and then at the end, we're going to crown the most underappreciated player of them all. So stick around to find out who that is. Before we really get started, though, John, I know you're keen to define what underappreciated means. John wouldn't let us start an episode without defining a word. So what do you think? What does it mean to you, underappreciated? Crucially, not underrated.
Yes, it's a very loose term, and so what I've done is I've tried to draw up some buckets for different ways that you can be underappreciated. So I just thought I'd run through the different profiles I've pulled up. First one is a little bit of counterintuitive perhaps because it's too good to be appreciated. But what I mean is the sorts of players who've been around forever and they've been so good for so long, you sort of underappreciate them because you just expect them to be as good as they are. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got players who are too maligned to be underappreciated, which is a very long word, and I tried to find another one, but I couldn't find it. But these are the sorts of players who I think they come into a club when the club's in a bad moment, and they sort of become, I guess, the sort of...
A scapegoat.
Scapegoat. And then as a result of that, they can't ever be appreciated in the future because they are associated with that period of the club's history.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've got players who are too subtle to be appreciated. Those are the players who sort of do the neat and tidy work and, the water carriers, as JJ likes to call them. They're doing neat and tidy stuff, but often goes under the radar. And then the final one I've got here is too recent to be appreciated. So this is when you have a young player coming through or a new player coming through and the needle hasn't quite caught up to where they are sort of appreciated, and that's those kind of players.
What a thorough definition there, John. Thank you so much for putting so much time and effort into that definition. Now, JJ, I'll come to you first with Arsenal because we're going alphabetically, everybody. And let me tell you, the three players that were voted by the Athletics newsroom the most underappreciated at Arsenal were Leandro Trossard, Kai Havertz, and Jurrien Timber. Now, what do you make of it, and do you pick one of those?
I think Jurrien Timber is the most underappreciated because he probably doesn't do a lot of the exciting stuff up the pitch that maybe you'd see. He can play multiple positions, which I think harms the appreciatedness of some players. But yet you also appreciate them for being able to play multiple positions. But he does them all very well, and that's why he is my most underappreciated player.
At this point in the video also, I'd love to interject to say, we're not saying players are underappreciated by their own fans, we're just saying by the broader football community. So please don't be angry with me. Okay, John, let's do Aston Villa now, okay, because they're next in alphabetical order. Let me tell you the three players that have been voted most underappreciated by the newsroom were Youri Tielemans, Boubacar Kamara, or Ezri Konsa.
I think that's actually quite a nice spread of different buckets there because we've got, on the one hand, Youri Tielemans, who I think is a good example of the too good to be appreciated because he's just been around forever, right? He was playing elite level football from the age of 16, 17, so he's sort of been around for a long while, but I think maybe he had a little bit of a drop off at Villa as well, so he's sort of coming back into things as well, so maybe that has contributed to his underappreciation. Then Boubacar Kamara, I think, is a good example of one of those subtle players who makes a big difference to a team, does a lot of the defensive work in that midfield, which I think is quite important. So I think a lot of the fans would probably say that he was maybe one of the more underappreciated players. But I think I'll go with Boubacar Kamara here, off that basis, I think.
Okay, JJ, let's do Bournemouth now. And the three players are Ryan Christie, Elia Zabani, and Lewis Cook. And I think I know who you're going to pick.
Well, do you?
Now I'm uncertain because you've asked me.
That's right. I'm going to pick two of them because I've gone for Ryan Christie and Lewis Cook.
Okay.
So I think to see why they're underappreciated, we should look at why or how Bournemouth play and what they do within that system, because both play in central midfield and both are really important to what they do. And Bournemouth, as you can see from this, are very high press intensity and many counterattacks. That's their style of play. That's what they do. And to do this, they have to win the ball high up the pitch a lot, and they do this more than any team in the top 4 European leagues. Not 5, 4, which is pretty impressive, I would say, because you don't think of that kind of stat from a Bournemouth, do you?
No.
The reason they're able to win the ball up the pitch so often and so effectively is because they're very well coached in their out of possession stuff. We're going to tread on John Mackenzie's elite shoes here and look at how Bournemouth press. So when they're playing against a team like this, what they want to do is really try and stay quite narrow and show the ball to the wide fullback a lot of the time. This is one example of how they'll press. So to do that, what they'll do is, say the ball is here, the ball will go here, and what will happen is this player will try and cut off this passing lane here. So that's what will happen. It'll be a bended run to get around there to block the pass off the goalkeeper. This player will immediately run up here, this player will go into here, and then you'll get this player will jump. So it's a hybrid press. And the idea is that if you can show the ball to this player eventually, you'll have locked off this side of the pitch. So you can't really get the ball back. You can't get the ball back over here. They're going to end up losing it, and you can win the ball high. And if they do manage to get it to this player and drop it to one of the wingers or something like that, one of these two midfielders, Christie or Lewis Cook, will move over to the side and win the ball back. So it's all like a coordinated, triggered press. That's what they do. And I can show you in action, because other teams know how Bournemouth are going to try and press them, and so they're how they want to play against it, and where Christie and Cook come into this as well. So this is Bournemouth playing against Man City. Ederson's the goalkeeper. He's very blurry because he's so fast, and he's passing the ball forward into the middle of the pitch. Because what Bournemouth want to do is the ball going through to Gundogan's dropping in here. They don't want this ball to come into this centre position here. They want it to go to the player who's out wide, because that's where they can trap them and really like engineer the press and win the ball back, I think. And so what they do is they form this sort of spade thing, so they can crush it and really can just squeeze it in the middle here. The ball's going in here so they can crush it back. This player, when he receives the ball, is going to have no real option other than probably to go back. Like the really good ones could probably spin it around or whatever, but you see they're tight to everyone. Now, if the ball does go out wide, you can see these are the two players who they're compact here because they're following him in, but they will go wide to press this player here. You normally think it would be like the fullback would jump up or something like that, but these two midfielders are the ones who often go wide positions to win the ball back. That is Christie and Lewis Cook. So as I said, the ball has to go backwards, as what Gundogan does, ends up back with Akanji. Now you can see the press is starting here, and you've got Walker as the one who's sort of left spare, so he's blocking the pass through the middle, ideally, if they can. So the ball will go to Walker, that's when they can trigger the press. Man City know this, they're really good. They disguise the pass, goes inside Kovacic, who then pushes it out wide. But the press has started, this is the trigger. So now you see all the players starting to come across, instantly moving to try and close this down. Ryan Christie is the one who gets closest to Kyle Walker. He's come across in the central midfield position. He gets his body in front of the ball, really good defending, to get your arm across them, block it off, can't go anywhere. He wins the ball back. And now all of a sudden, within the first minute of the game, Kirkes, the left back, can underlap here to push forward. You can see Kluivert's in the middle here with loads of space to run into behind him. He can then turn, run through. Evan Nielsen can run through towards the goal. Ball's played through to him. He almost gets a chance away. And that is all from Bournemouth's really clever press, and was one of their triggers. And Man City know about this as well, but still can't help themselves with it. And Christie's essential in this. He's won possession 158 times. That's a lot. Amazing. In fact, only one player has had more. Do you know who it is?
Is it Moises Caicedo?
It's Moises Caicedo, because you can read the table. Yeah. But Christie done it from one game fewer, which therefore means he's better and should be more appreciated. But he's also producing like a 10 as well. So he is playing that ball-winning role, but he's also helping control games. His progressive passes are really high, but also his shot-creating actions are pretty high in Bournemouth's team. So the players who are above him in Bournemouth's numbers, according to EpiRef, would be Tavernier, Kluivert and Semenyo, who are all wingers or number 10, something like that. So you expect them to be high. But Christie, when they go, he helps win the ball deeper, but when they go forward, he helps control the zone in front of the box, so he can play like the 10 that he kind of is, because that's what Christie is really. He's a number 10. From his Celtic days at Scotland as well, he often plays high up the pitch. But for Bournemouth, now, as you can see here, he's taken far more touches deeper in the blue bit. Yeah. It's flooded, and he's swimming.
It's a bigger bit, to be fair.
Yes, it's a lot bigger bit, but he's helping with build-up. He's also receiving the ball here more. He's also just doing more in the deeper areas. But it's different to what he was doing, because he is really number 10, but he's now playing as like a 6 and an 8 all at the same time. And then I just want to give a bit of a nod to Lewis Cook, who has also been essential to Bournemouth. He's been playing right back for the last like 5 games in a row. I think it's 5, maybe 6.
Oh, really?
Doesn't really matter how many games he plays at right back. He's multi-positional. Yeah. He's also their captain. He does a lot of stuff off the ball too. So Christie's really busy, but Lewis Cook is also really busy. He's made more tackles and interceptions than any other Bournemouth player this season. And he's done that after having, over his career, had 2 serious cruciate ligament injuries. Wow. So people forget this. Yeah. Those are really hard to recover from and still be really good. Yeah. And he's done that twice. And I think that's why he is probably the most underappreciated, because I think people are starting to see what Christie does. Whereas you look at Lewis Cook, I think he has been underappreciated for a long, long time. Could easily have been, I think, probably England level at some point. Yeah. But I wonder whether injuries and playing for Bournemouth might have derailed his potential caps. Okay,
moving on to Brentford, John. Brentford, now there's a couple of players mentioned here. There's Mikkel Damsgaard, Nathan Collins, and Keane Lewis-Potter. Who are you going to pick?
Well, I just want to talk about Mikkel Damsgaard.
Sure, who doesn't?
I love him. I think he's great. And I think the reason he's great is because he's a bit of an outlier, I think, in the Premier League, because in the Premier League, it's become such a physical league now. The majority of the players have a level of physicality, even if they are more technical, creative players. And I think Damsgaard sort of goes against the trend there because he is very, very lightweight. And as a result, I think that when you watch him play, there's certain things that he does that are super interesting. Because I think what I'm going to try and show now is that he has to be super aware of like finding space to receive the ball in order to be functional. He doesn't want to take contact when he's receiving the ball, but then when he's got the ball at his feet, he can then get into these more tight space areas. So he's not using his lack of physicality as a way of holding him back. He's actually looking for ways of being able to be functional in the Premier League, even within that physical environment. So I'm going to start with a few things in the data, because I think this is kind of interesting. So what I did when I was preparing this is I went through Photovision and had a look at some of their data. They have tracking data, so I can look at spatial stuff in the data for them. And one of the things where Damsgaard stands out is in the creation phase. Now the creation phase is just their way of defining a certain phase of play. So I put the definition in here. The creation phase basically means you're in the final third and you have the ball there for more than 4 seconds. Now the final third, as we know, is way more congested generally for teams when they're trying to possess the ball, because the opposition are trying to stop you from having any joy around their goal. Yeah. So space is already compacted in those areas. Mikael Damsgaard is a player who is going to be operating in those areas, but as we said, needs to find space to receive the ball in, because if he doesn't do that, then he will be physically dominated by opponents.
He'll be manhandled, JJ.
That's right. What's really interesting is if you look at all of the forwards in the Premier League now, you can see that the percentage of passes that he receives in space in that creation phase, so in the final third, he is the guy who's receiving the most percentage of passes in space.
And these other guys are wingers, right?
Yeah, so and that's worth saying, I think, because a lot of these guys are wingers, so they're operating in wider areas, so they get more space. And again, we can actually break it down and have a look at how much space he's actually finding in terms of when he's receiving the ball. So this is again against the forwards in the Premier League. The players who are around him, this is just number 10s now, so I've got rid of all of the wide players because, as you said, wide players are going to be in more space generally. Yeah. And the players who show up now are players like Bruno Fernandes, Dwight McNeil, Justin Kluivert. We see Damsgaard right at the top here. Now, Bruno Fernandes and Dwight McNeil have both played in the wide areas quite a lot this season. Yep. Damsgaard has as well, but to a much lesser extent. But I think what's really interesting about Damsgaard is that although he's playing in central areas, he wants to get into those central areas. In order to get space, he ends up moving into the wide areas to receive the ball. So if we look at his touch map this season, we can see the majority of touches are coming on both sides of the pitch. So what he's doing is he's moving into those wide areas to generate space for himself to receive the ball. And then after that, he's moving central. So this is his ball carries attempted to take on. So you can see a lot of these carries are starting in the wide areas and then coming into more dangerous positions as well.
Is the star where he collects the ball?
That's where he collects the ball, okay. Yeah. So for example, this one here is he's received the ball in the wide channel and then he's driving towards the box. Yeah. So really, really interesting, because what he's doing then is he's using space to receive the ball, getting it under settled possession and then taking it into more dangerous areas. So just wanted to show a number of examples of this happening. So he does it a lot in build-up. These are all clips from the Everton game that they played most recently. Here's Damsgaard dropping out to receive the ball. So dropping out quite deep. Let's not forget he's an attacking midfielder here. So dropping into that wide area, look how much space he affords himself to receive that ball. Once he's got the ball to feet under possession, in his possession, he can then carry it into a more dangerous area. He also does this in the progression phase as well. So what he's always doing is just looking for those spaces between the lines. Here he can receive the ball from Pinnock into this area here, picks it up and drives it forward. Here he is on the other side. The ball's gone long. Christopher Ayer's going to play the ball to him. Look how much space he's generated from this moment where essentially Brentford are playing the ball into what should be a highly congested area. So always looking for this space. But I've got a couple of sequences just to show you what he does in the final third to generate space. So this is a throw in. Christopher Ayer is throwing the ball to him. Already you can see he's dropped away from that 10 spot where he would usually be. Look how much space he's generated. Again, this is an area where it should be super congested because it's a throw in. Everton should be well positioned to be able to actually defend him.
Maybe he smells.
Perhaps that is the case. But what he's done here is he's generated space, and in this sequence, he just doesn't let any one of these players get anywhere near him. So first touch on the ball, he takes a cushion touch into the floor. When the ball then moves away, you can see that it's just so close to where he was before. Like the technical nature of his touch is such that he can just kill the ball dead, and then he immediately plays the pass. This is as close as Everton get to him in this moment. So he just doesn't ever risk the physical pressure. Yeah. This is actually was the disallowed goal from that game as well. And again, you can see finding space to receive the ball. The ball's going to come down the line. This is on the other side of the pitch, so you can see he's moving both ways on the field. And in this instance, what he actually does is he tries to use a body feint to sell Idrissa Gueye. He makes it look like he's going to come back inside, which is the natural thing to do because the space is here. Yeah. Instead, what he does is he lets it run across his body. Idrissa Gueye doesn't actually get faked and is able to get in between the ball and Damsgaard. Now, at this point, you're thinking, well, that's game over for Damsgaard because he's not going to be able to get it. But actually, what he does really well in this instance is he uses Idrissa Gueye's momentum against him and is actually able to sort of drift around the outside and get back in between him and the ball. He doesn't even compete physically in this instance. He sort of uses his liveness to get around the player. He then is able to carry the ball forward. And this is what I mean. He's a player who needs to receive in space, but he's really happy then going into these more tight space environments once he has possession of the ball because he has the ability to jink side to side. He's a really technical player, so he can come out well in these scenarios. In this instance, James Garner's coming across to tackle him, and what he actually does then is he moves the ball back inside, uses again the momentum of the player against him, and ends up in this scenario here at the edge of the box with a number of passing options. Now, obviously, in this instance, he takes the most obvious passing lane, which is, what would you say is the most obvious?
To the guy next to him.
It's the reverse blind pass into Keane Lewis-Potter, who's running the channel behind him.
I would argue that's unobvious.
Yeah, it's not. It's the least obvious of those passes.
Tricked.
Yeah,
you've been fooled.
I've got you. I would argue that this is maybe the best pass of the Premier League season so far because it's just, when you watch it in real time, go and have a watch of this game. When you watch it in real time, it just doesn't even seem to know that Keane Lewis-Potter is there. He just, and you look at the way that he's facing, he has to hook his leg right round to play the ball into him. And I will never forgive Keane Lewis-Potter for missing this because I think if he scores this goal, that pass will be remembered for a very long time. This is a thing that people are appreciating Mikkel Damsgaard for now, these really creative passes around the edge of the box. There was he set up the goal against Leicester City with a really nice little dinked pass as well. Yeah. These are the things that people remember him for, but I think when you actually watch him, sit down and see what it is that he does on the pitch, what's super impressive is his ability to just create space and operate in space in such a way that his physical deficiencies for the Premier League in a general sense are not actually defining his career. He's actually able to compete with these guys who are at the top of their physical games. I think it's really impressive.
Using your brain to adapt, to overcome your physical limitations. Yeah. I can see why he's your hero, John. Now, JJ, let's move on to Brighton. And let me tell you, the three players that the Athletics newsroom suggested for most underappreciated were Danny Welbeck, Jan-Paul van Hacke, and Carlos Baleba. I
think that would have to be Van Hecke as most underappreciated.
Tell me why.
Well, I think Baleba is clearly a top-level player and is going to go places. Welbeck, we've known about him for years, and he's always felt underappreciated, therefore he must be appreciated.
Oh, he's having a flowers season.
He's having a moment. He was having one last season as well. And I think Van Hecke, what he does for Brighton, especially in possession, and his progressive passes numbers are really impressive. And that is also, that's obviously really important for being able to play out from the back and just be able to break lines and get your team attacking space as quickly as you can. So we don't actually know what his ceiling is, which is another reason why I think he's underappreciated, because if he were to suddenly be like a £50 million bid to, I don't know, Man United, you'd be like, oh, he's really good, and he'd be appreciated. Yeah. But because he's not quite been linked with all those moves yet, he's not, and that's why.
Okay, very exciting. Now, could Jan-Paul van Hecke be the most underappreciated player statistically according to the newsroom? No, it's not him, but hang around to find out who that is. John, tell me about Chelsea. We've got Nicholas Jackson, Marc Cucurella and Malo Gusto.
Yeah, Nicholas Jackson is an interesting one, right? Because I think a lot of the strikers who show up in these underappreciated voting systems are always the ones who people think are just bad finishers, right? So we had Kai Havertz before as well. And I think as a result, people generally judge strikers on their ability to finish goals. If they're not finishing goals, it's like, well, they're not good.
Absolutely.
And the obvious counter argument to that is, well, strikers can do other things that are useful as well, right? Yeah. And I think that's.
But then call them forwards, you know. That's my only thing. If you're a striker, I feel like you have to score goals. If you're a forward or an attacker or even a centre forward, then I'm more. I think it's fine.
Jackson's like his underlying numbers, like expected goals, is always super high. Like,
I'm not talking
so
about
much
him.
higher. Oh well.
Just to be clear, I'm not talking about him. I've moved us on to have a conceptual conversation about whether someone's a striker or an attacker, what expectations come with certain roles. I'm derailing the show. What is it, John?
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about Cucurella as well, because I think Cucurella is an interesting one. He's obviously played a super flexible role under Maresca as well, where he's inverted both into sort of central areas almost as a pivot player in build-up, but also getting into attacking areas as well.
Yeah.
And I think with Cucurella, maybe underappreciated because he set up a quite important goal for Spain in the final of a recent tournament.
Well,
so it could be the case that people don't like him. Maybe the Chelsea fans would argue that they do appreciate him because he's someone who he gets around the pitch and puts in a lot of effort, does a lot of off-ball work as well.
So who are you picking then?
I think I'll go with Cucurella.
Okay.
Because I think with Jackson, I don't know. Maybe I just have a bias against people just being like, well, it's a striker, he should finish, therefore he's not good. But
sure.
And I understand that kind of argument, but at the
it's
same
a subjective
time,
game.
Yeah, I
That's
guess
fine.
so.
JJ, let's do Crystal Palace now, and the newsroom have voted for Will Hughes, Daniel Munoz, and Maxence Lacroix.
I am going to go for Will Hughes. Because I think he's still not their first choice centre midfielder, yet he keeps battling his way into the team. And you need players like Will Hughes who like to fight for the ball, but are also very good with it. He's technically very good, Will Hughes, but you think of him as a little battling, ball-winning player. So I think that's why he's underappreciated.
Well, a starting berth for Will Hughes soon, hopefully. Everton, we've got James Garner, Idrissa Gueye, and Jordan Pickford.
Yeah, I thought Everton are a fun one because actually when I looked through the voting numbers for this one, I saw that Everton were the team with the most spread across the newsroom in The Athletic. I kind of wondered about that. Like, what is it about Everton that meant that there was a bit more of a spread? So I've got the pie chart here to show you. So James Garner had the most votes, but then we've got Jordan Pickford and Idrissa Gueye also, and Doucouré as well, really, with big chunks of the vote share as well, and then a number of other players as well. But I was trying to think why is it the case that Everton in particular had players everyone was like, oh yeah, that player's underappreciated, and that player's underappreciated, and that player's also underappreciated.
What conclusion have you come to?
Well, I don't know. I wondered whether or not part of it might come down to having two different managers recently, right?
Yeah.
So in some senses, you then end up with a broader spread of different players who haven't been used before, and now they're being used a bit more.
Yeah.
So for example, James Garner, I mean, he's been injured and has been out, but has been fairly regular in Moyes' Everton and hasn't been played under Dyche. So it could be the case that people are thinking, well, why was he not played as much under Dyche? But I also wondered whether or not Everton just are a team where, they have a lot of underappreciated players, right? Because of the way that their play style is set up is a lot of the time you're doing like grungy work that no one really wants to talk about, like lots of sitting in and having to be disciplined in defensive structures.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard work to do in terms of like concentration and stuff. Maybe not so much from a technical point of view, but then players who I think that then will stand out. So we've got Garner, we've got Gueye, the two centre midfielders at the moment as the underappreciated players. So again, maybe they go into that bucket of not being appreciated because they're too subtle.
Yeah.
I went and then obviously Pickford, the goalkeeper as well. Which sort of fits into that model. But I wondered if you guys had any sort of takes on why they...
I mean, it's a results-biased game anyway, really, isn't it? I mean, and Everton did very, very poorly for the first half of the season and then all of a sudden have exploded into good form. So perhaps it's just that fans and people around the football world thought that all of their players were rubbish, and now they think some of them are good, and therefore there's loads of underappreciated players.
I think there might be a difference between like the really best Premier League players, like the elite, and then the just really good Premier League players who are already like of the elite. Now, this doesn't really make sense, but there's like the elite to get to Premier League level, then there's the little special stars. And there are a lot of players like I think James Garner's a good example where when he plays, he doesn't look exceptional, but he does occasional things. Like there's a couple of through balls he's played this season from deep that have sent a player through. And so that makes them look really great in that one instance, but most of the time they're just doing the other stuff very quietly, very well.
Yeah.
Like this real subtle movement, body positioning, being able to receive and play a short pass, knowing when to play a bounce pass rather than just launch it, and then you don't try and take hold of the game yourself. Whereas it's interesting that Ndiaye is the lowest of all of them, because I would say he's the least Everton-y player of all the Everton players, in that he's very much a flair player. You don't think of him as working hugely hard off the ball, but he does. His numbers are really high out of possession.
Maybe it's just that he's had a lot of recognition recently, and so people don't feel that he's underappreciated.
Maybe, I don't. Yeah, it's odd. Yeah.
Well, who are you picking, John?
I think I will go with. Yeah, I feel like there's plenty to pick from, but yeah, I'll go with James Garner because I think he sort of does. He sort of takes that mantle of like being too subtle to be appreciated, and he's a player he's playing at centre midfield at the moment. He spent a lot of time at fullback for Everton as well. So one of those players like Lewis Cook, who when a manager wants to rely on someone to fill in, he's there as well. So I'll go with Garner.
I feel like I should have gone for Munoz now with Crystal Palace because we've got lots of midfielders in our list.
It's hard not to go for midfielders, I think, because a lot of the time what midfielders do is quite underappreciated in general.
There's so much to it, yeah.
Right, let's get quick fiery now, JJ. Fulham, we've got Alex Iwobi, Sander Berge, and Sasha Lukic.
Sander Berge.
Oh, excellent. Oh, there we go. That was nice. Fine. Ipswich, John, we've got Dara O'Shea, Jens Kajust, and Alex Palmer.
Yeah, I was going to go for Kajust on this one just because he's a player who's currently owned by Napoli. And is on loan at Ipswich, and I feel like if any other team had a player from Napoli playing for them, that he would be talked about way more than Kajust has been been talked about. So I'm going to go for him on this one. But quite a fun Swedish player. He's got 25 caps for Sweden, so he is a sort of a high-level player. But maybe he's being a little bit underappreciated because he is playing for an Ipswich team who are having to do a lot of sort of defensive backs to the wall stuff.
Fair enough. Imagine coming on loan from Napoli to Ipswich. That would be fun. Now, Leicester, JJ, we've got Mads Manson, Ricardo Pereira, Wilfred Ndidi.
If I go for Ndidi, it's like all the other midfielders. So I'll go for Wilfred Ndidi, who is still doing it at the top level. People thought he was done, but he's not.
It feels like a 2018 pick, that one, doesn't it?
It does,
He was underappreciated back then too.
He's still
like
so
him as a
young
player.
though. He's like, what, 27? Is that
he?
right? He's
28, I think. I think he's 28.
He's quite young.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Okay, Liverpool, John. Now this one's interesting. We have Curtis Jones, Alexis McAllister, Ibrahima Konate. And for me, it's hard to say that any of those players are particularly underappreciated. Certainly not by Liverpool fans, who never stop talking about Curtis Jones. But maybe the wider Premier League fan community might not appreciate how good Curtis Jones is.
Yeah, I mean, we did a video last year, I think. JJ did a video on how Curtis Jones is underappreciated. So, I think it's hard not to say,
he's appreciated.
Yeah, it's hard not to say that ship has sailed. But I think it's tough doing underappreciated players at the big sides as well. I wondered whether or not Wataru Endo would come up in this because he's very much a sort of squad player for Liverpool, and I think most Liverpool fans would say he's probably not been at the level that they would have wanted a player like that to be at. But he's been actually quite an important part of their championship run. Say championship run, that it's not guaranteed that they will win the Premier League yet, but it's looking that way. And I think those are the kind of players at these big sides that maybe go under the radar a little bit. But yeah, I think Curtis Jones is sort of emblematic of the underappreciated player who actually is quite appreciated, but I'll go with him anyway.
Sometimes I think Alexis McAllister might actually be quite good for this as well because he's the Ryan Christie of Liverpool in my mind. It's not always obvious. Or overtly obvious what he's amazing at, but he's clearly so important.
Yeah, I think I want him to do more exciting things than he does.
Right.
And I think also I've seen him get caught in possession just a couple more times than I need him to feel he was underappreciated.
Do you think he's overappreciated?
He's won the World Cup. He's won the World Cup.
That's true. He's won the World Cup. Okay, JJ, Manchester City, Josko Gvardiol, Manuel Akanji, and Savinho.
Oh, I would say Akanji.
Yeah?
I think he's been excellent for them for a long time. Can play in midfield, doing that John Stonesy bit. Plays all across the back line. I think he's definitely the answer there.
Yeah, he was 15 million as well, which I think makes him like the cheapest Man City player really for a long time. So yeah, I think that goes
beautiful, beautiful, John. Man United, less beautiful. Harry Maguire is on the list here. Manuel Ugarte and Matthias de Ligt.
Well, you and I have had conversations about Harry Maguire in particular because I think he is he's one of those emblematic. Underappreciated players. I think he actually fits into that bucket that we were talking about before, which is too maligned to be appreciated.
Yeah.
Because he obviously arrived at a sort of rough patch of Manchester United history and sort of became emblematic of that rough patch.
Yeah. He became a bit of a scapegoat and he did some bad things, which didn't help himself loads.
But I feel like as though he's been one of the winners perhaps under Ruben Amorim, if we can talk about them there
He
being any wins.
He has. Our argument, we should say for the audience, is that we disagree on where culture is right now and how far it's gone. John thinks more people are like him and have recognised already that Harry Maguire's had a good season. I think that more people are like me and don't know what's going on.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of people just have that holdover from the past where they'll be like, well, I just couldn't consider that he would be a good player, right? And that's not to say that Harry Maguire is having an incredible season, but he's probably a little bit better than maybe some of the fan base would want to admit.
So you're picking Harry Maguire?
Yeah, well, let's go with him.
I've bludgeoned him into it, JJ. Isn't it fun? Now, JJ, Newcastle, tell me about that. There's Jacob Murphy, Lewis Hall and Joe Linton.
Well, that's good, because I've gone with a player who wasn't on that list, Fabian Schär, who I really like. I think he does all the quiet things very, very well as a centre-back.
Yeah.
You never really think about him. He's been a Swiss international for a long time, but he was part of the best defence in the Premier League like 2 seasons ago when Newcastle got into the Champions League, and he's the ball-playing part of that defence. You just don't think of him as being this elite-level player, but he was super cheap. It's like £3 million or something like that they signed him for a while ago, so they got good value. But yeah, his numbers are never like huge, but he's good at stepping up to intercept the ball, because Newcastle's press is not dissimilar to what Bournemouth do, and he's really important for following players in and snapping that, but also at playing the ball forward. But Jacob Murphy is the one that I think people would probably look to more as being the most underappreciated, because he's playing that wide right role. He switches between being a playmaker and like inside forward, like a pressing forward a lot. He does all of the out of possession stuff extremely well. And I think we don't think of him as being this great player because he just doesn't seem like it. He seems like he's a championship player who's gone to Newcastle and now he's just sort of there as a squad player. But those are really important. You need good squad players who are happy to do the work and then to come on and do a job when you need them to. And in fact, he's really important to how they play. Because if we look at this from Photo Vision, thanks to John Mackenzie for doing my work for me, this is the counter-attacks initiated per 90 in the Premier League. And Murphy is the third most counter-attack initiatingness.
Wow.
Yes.
That's incredible.
He's also really fast. Look, average speed in counter-attack, 13.54 kilometres an hour.
Oh.
That's faster than some cars.
That's just under half the speed of a Tyrannosaur.
That's correct. That's correct. And but Murphy, more dangerous than the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the final third. And so I think that's probably why he gets underappreciated.
Well done, Jacob Murphy. Now, John, Nottingham Forest, we have Elliot Anderson, Matt Sells or Ola Aina.
Yeah, I think Elliot Anderson is just a great example of maybe an underappreciated player, because I think he obviously arrives at Forest off the back of PSR shenanigans, and so I think as a result of that, people were like, you know, is this guy actually any good? He was quite a meaty fee, but is he really worth that, or is this just a way of being able to move money around? And yeah, he's had a really important season for them, so I think he's very well deserving of the underappreciated tag here.
All right, great stuff. JJ, let's move on to Southampton. We have Matthias Fernandes, Kyle Walker-Peters and Aaron Ramsdale.
Well, I'm going to pick Kyle Walker-Peters. I think Matthias Fernandes is a very good player who will play at a high level for his entire career, but Walker-Peters has been doing underappreciated things for a long time and could be playing at any other Premier League team, and maybe he will once Southampton go down. Okay,
big shout for Walker-Peters there. John, Tottenham, we have Jed Spence, Dejan Kulusevski, surely it can't be Dejan Kulusevski, and Lucas Bergvall.
Yeah, that's fun. I think the two non-Kulusevski options are very much in the too recent to be appreciated, right? And I think maybe that's what's going on here. Like Jed Spence has had a breakout in the last few months, which I think has probably rocketed him to a position where I think he's probably quite appreciated by both fans of the club and outside of that, but because it's so early on in his Spurs career. I mean, He was at the club for something like a year and a half before he made a start for the club, which is crazy, really. And then Bergvall, a young player who they've brought in and sort of been, maybe his development slightly accelerated by the fact that they've had so many injuries as well.
I appreciate Bergvall, so it can't be him.
Okay, well, we'll go for Jed Spence then, who I think has had a really nice, I don't want to say remontada, but that it's just a tada. He's not had the remon bit.
He's had a lovely tada. Now, West Ham, JJ, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Thomas Soucek, or Jared Bowen. I mean, there's only one obvious answer here, isn't there?
Who are the other two, apart from Wan-Bissaka?
Don't need to say their names again.
Oh, it's obviously Wan-Bissaka.
Yeah.
Because you remember when lots of people thought he was bad at Man United, that was kind of the narrative, because he wasn't performing as well as you wanted him to. He was limited. Attacking-wise was the theory. Well, at West Ham, he's really, really important to them. So he has the second most touches of any West Ham player this season. So like the second most amount of playing with the ball in the whole team. You've got to be good. And as you can see, his position is slightly more attacking under West Ham here. He's played a lot as a wing-back this season and a full-back. They've changed between different systems all during the season. But he's driving forward much more with the ball. This is a player who was a winger at Crystal Palace before he was moved into a fullback position and became the unstoppable tackling man that we all knew him of doing. Sometimes I surprise myself with where I'm going. So here he is, running up and down the wing, doing all the star boy stuff. Is what you want, much more than at Man United. He's also played a lot on the left for West Ham, actually, which is quite interesting because he's been able to provide a lot of crosses from there as well. You think of him as quite one-footed, but he's technically really, really good. And he's created chances here as well from West Ham. So getting to the byline, crossing from deeper as well, all kinds of crosses, as compared for Man United when he did much less of everything. What I think is interesting to look at is his attacking numbers aren't huge. He's not got lots of assists, and he's got lots of the ball, and especially in attacking areas. I want to see why that is. And I think it's because of his teammates who just don't do what he needs them to do. If he was playing at a good team like Man United were, maybe he would get more. It's a really odd situation. Yeah. I'll try and explain what I mean. Wan-Bissaka is circled on the ball here. Just a few examples of him crossing the ball in, right? So this is him getting quite high up the pitch. Bearing in mind, he's the right back. He's not the winger, but he plays like that. So Kudus is the player in the middle, number 14, who's going to attack the ball. But what you really want, thanks to the magic of Photoshop, is for him to be here.
Yeah.
2 Kuduses.
Yeah.
I'm seeing double.
That would be good. 2 Duses.
2 Dus. Yeah. So what you really want in this sort of situation, actually, when you're attacking, is to have one player like Kudus who's going to attack the near post or just drag defenders away, and a player where Kudus is to be there for the cutback. Because if there's just one player, like in the previous slide, then one of these players can jump to him and stop that getting forward. So they're not going to score from that situation. It's too hard to score.
They'd have 12 players as well, which is
it's
good.
An advantage, and they should be able to score even more with 12 on the pitch. But yet they don't. And so here he is playing against Southampton. Now you see exactly the this you want him to have. You've got one player this is Fulkrug, who's the striker. He's playing where you want the striker. Then you've got a player number 4 behind him who's there for the cutback. And I think they actually score or get a shot away here anyway. But here he is, he's really good at against Crystal Palace. His old team, almost 2v1. He's not really got many options here. The obvious pass is inside to number 61 here, but instead he's able to zip past both of them with a little drop shoulder and goes down the line really quick. Great feet, gets to here. Then he crosses in. And still, you don't have a player where Kudus would want to be. So between the 2 centre-backs here, 26 and 5, you want to have a striker there. You either take them away from or towards the goal to create space behind. But you've got Jared Bowen, who's not, or it's Danny Ings actually is on, but he plays more of the withdrawn striker a lot of the time, not making that run to the front post. It's odd, because you'd think you'd want him to be there, and he's got time to be there in the situation as well. And players following in behind. The cross isn't perfect, and then the young player attacks his cross at the wrong point. But regardless of what happens with the cross, look at the back 4. There's no one in that line to attack that ball. Yeah. And that's where he's playing the ball rather than to the people who are waiting for the cutback. So I think with other players up front, if Nicholas Fulkrug hadn't been broken this season, he might have had a lot more assists and chances created and things like that. But I think he's done phenomenally well to recover from being kind of like maligned at Man United to become a really important attacking fullback.
Good for Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Thanks, JJ. Okay, and lastly, John, Wolves. We have Ryan Aït-Nouri, Jorgen Strand Larsen, and João Gomez.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because my instinct is to go for someone like João Gomez, but again, that's because he's a midfielder who does like neat and tidy stuff.
He is good though.
I feel as though Aït-Nouri is appreciated, isn't he? I feel like he's what a lot of people would say is the best Wolves player really, and he's always being linked to bigger clubs.
Again, he might be appreciated by Wolves fans, but is he really appreciated by fans of the Premier League?
I don't know. I think so. Who's the other one? The middle one?
Jorgen Strand Larsen.
He's the striker, yeah. Let's go with him by process of elimination.
Too afraid to pick another midfielder, doesn't want to pick the other guy. It's Jorgen Strand Larsen, congratulations! And that brings us to the end. Well, not quite, because now we have to find out who is the most underappreciated player overall. So this is in total votes from the newsroom. Volume. Yeah. And in 5th place, I'm going to tell you the top 5. 5th most votes overall was Matheus Fernandes from Southampton. 4th most was actually Ryan Aït-Nouri from Wolves, John. You picked the wrong player there. You should feel bad. You've made a mistake. 3rd was a 3-way tie with Yuri Tielemans, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and Elliot Anderson. So I think we did well all around there. 2nd was a 2-way tie with Will Hughes and Nicholas Jackson. That seems very fair. But in top spot, the most underappreciated player in the whole of the Premier League, according to the Athletics newsroom by voting, is Jacob Murphy of Newcastle with 15 votes.
That's good for him.
It is good for him.
Who was the least appreciated?
I don't know, but also it's worth saying that actually it's not really what this means because they voted on each team, and all that really means is that there were fewer underappreciated players at Newcastle to alternatively vote for other than Jacob Murphy. So it just means actually he's the most underappreciated at his team where there are the fewest number of underappreciated players on the team. Doesn't actually mean anything.
But I think he's a worthy winner. I think
Sure.
that he would be the sort of player that I would think of as if someone said to me,
Yeah.
he's the most underappreciated player, I'd be like, yeah, you're right.
Me too, John. Me too.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.